Good morning and good day. Welcome to 3:15 o'clock, that very channel where the unspoken becomes unforgettable. Do you have the courage to explore the stories they always wanted to hide from you? This is not just a horror channel. This is a place where silence is shattered by secrets, and every story carries a weight of fear it was never meant to bear. The first story. The Curse of Silence. My name is Stewie Colliford. I was born and raised in the state of Arkansas, on the outskirts of West Memphis. One day, my father told me a true story that freezes the blood in your veins. This story doesn't fit in my head, and it always makes me look over my shoulder when I hear strange sounds. The first thing I heard when I stepped onto the threshold of my new old house was a child's whisper. It was barely audible, like the rustle of dry leaves on a windless day. Damien. I froze, gripping the handle of my suitcase so hard my knuckles turned white. The doctor in prison said auditory hallucinations were normal for those who had spent too long in confinement, especially for those convicted by mistake, especially for those the whole world considered a monster. But I knew I hadn't been convicted by mistake. I had been convicted for something I didn't do, but that someone or something had done in my place. Returning to West Memphis after 18 years on death row was insanity. Everyone advised me to go far away, start a new life where no one knew my face. But where could I go from myself? From their faces. The faces of Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers. They never aged. They remained forever 8-year-old boys from the newspaper covers of 1993, while I, Damien Eccles, grew old, turned gray, and became covered in scars that weren't there on the day they died. The house was the same one. Sold for a pittance after my parents' death. It had stood abandoned all these years. It smelled of dust, mold, and grief. I dropped my suitcase in the hallway, and a cloud of dust billowed toward the ceiling, dancing in a beam of light piercing through a window nailed shut. I had to come here. It was the only place I could find answers. The curse of the Arkansas Supreme Court, which had dismissed the charges against me due to lack of evidence, had not absolved me of guilt in the eyes of the town, or in my own eyes. Because I remembered that evening. I remembered everything. Back. In 1993, I was different. An angry, confused teenager into metal and Nietzsche. The perfect scapegoat for a boring religious town where 3 mutilated boys were found in a ditch off Robin Hill's hillside. They were killed in a ritualistic style. The satanic panic had been given a name, mine. But I knew the truth. That night, I was in the woods, not to kill. I was going to a meeting. Someone was supposed to speak with me. I had heard voices for weeks. An obsessive, convincing whisper calling me to that place. It promised answers. It promised power. It promised to show me the true nature of things. I went, frightened and fascinated, and I saw it. A shadow, not a man, not an animal, something tall, unnaturally bent, consisting of intertwined, crooked limbs and fingers too long, scratching the earth. It was bent over something, over someone by the water. And a sound reached me, not a scream, not a whisper, but something in between, a wet, gurgling rasp that was forever seared into my memory. I ran. Frantic with fear, I stumbled, fell, tore my clothes on thorns, and was found the next morning asleep on my own porch, covered in mud and with blood under my fingernails. Not my blood. Their blood. The next 18 years I spent trying to prove I didn't kill them. But I never tried to prove I hadn't seen the killer. because who would have believed me? And so I returned. The first night in the house was quiet. Too quiet. The sounds of the town didn't reach here, on the outskirts, next to those very woods. I tossed and turned on a camp bed, and every creak of the floorboard, every rustle of a mouse behind the wall made my heart pound furiously. I waited for the whisper. But it didn't come. There was only an oppressive, living silence. At dawn, I went to the creek. Robin Hill's hillside had changed. The trees were taller, the road had been widened, but the place remained the same. It smelled the same, of damp earth, rotting leaves and copper ore. And something else. A sweetish, barely perceptible smell of decay that hadn't faded in 2 decades. I stood on the edge of that ravine and I shook. Images from the newspapers flashed before my eyes. Little sneakers sticking out of the water, police tape fluttering in the wind. And the shadow, always that shadow. You came back. I spun around sharply, expecting to see a local bully or a reporter, but behind me was only the forest. Empty and silent. We waited. The voice was right in my ear, a child's voice, distorted by static like a bad radio signal. It was Chris's voice. I recognized it. Over the years in my cell, I had memorized every one of his interviews, every school recording. "Chris?" I whispered, and my own voice sounded hoarse and foreign. In response, only the wind swayed the tops of the pines. I felt a nauseating wave of panic and ran back to the house, stumbling over roots, just like on that terrible evening. The following days blurred into a nightmarish haze. The whisper became constant. First one voice, then another. Steve, Michael, Chris. They didn't threaten. They just were. Commenting on my actions. "He's washing the dishes. Mom will be pleased. Not that book. Boring. Why are you afraid? You're not guilty." Not entirely. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I scoured the house, trying to find anything, my parents' old records, my own diaries. I was looking for proof of my madness, or proof of their existence. I no longer knew what I wanted more. In the basement, behind a stack of old National Geographic magazines, I found a box with my childhood things, and at the bottom, my old tape recorder. The batteries, of course, had leaked, but the device itself looked intact. With a smoldering hope, I drove into town and bought new batteries. The store clerk recognized me. His face went pale, and he refused to take my money. Just shoved the batteries into my hand and turned away as if I were a leper. That evening, I sat in the kitchen, inserted the batteries with trembling hands, and pressed play. At first, there was only empty, hissing silence. Then, my own teenage voice recordings, reading poetry, strumming on a guitar. I was already ready to throw the thing out the window when suddenly, silence. And then, another sound. Not mine. The recording was made that night. I didn't remember taking the recorder with me, but it was in my jacket pocket, and the record button had been pressed by something. On the tape, you could hear my heavy breathing, the crack of branches underfoot, the frantic beating of my heart. I was listening to the last minutes of my innocence. And then, I stop. My breath catches, and in the background, that same gurgling rasp that had haunted my dreams all these years. But now, cleaned up by digital sound, I made out the words. It wasn't one voice. It was 3 voices, woven into one, speaking in unison, full of inhuman agony and something else. Something ancient and evil. "Here, don't go. Look." And then, on the recording, my own stifled scream echoed. the sound of flight, and a pure, clear child's laughter. The laughter of 3 children. Laughter like that wasn't on any archival recording. It was laughter full of absolute non-childlike malice. I turned off the recorder. My hands were shaking. This was proof. Proof that I was there. Proof that I saw something. Proof that I wasn't insane. But it was also proof that there was something else there. Something that laughed. "Now you know," Michael's voice whispered behind me. I didn't turn around. I just sat there, staring at the wall, until it was completely dark outside. They started to appear. First, out of the corner of my eye, a figure flickering in the hallway, a reflection in the window glass. Then clearer. They stood in the garden, the 3 of them, holding hands. Their faces were pale, but not distorted in horror like in the post-mortem photos. They were calm, empty. Their clothes were clean except for dark, wet stains around each of their throats. They didn't approach. They just watched, and the whisper in my head became clearer. "It wants to finish," Stevie said. "It started here," Michael added. "It must finish here," Chris finished. I understood. This wasn't a curse of the place. It was a curse of the action. The ritual started by that creature that night had not been completed. It was interrupted by my appearance, and now the force behind it demanded completion. But for that, it needed a point of leverage, a conduit. It needed me. The West Memphis 3. It wasn't me and Jesse and Jason. It was them, the 3 murdered boys, and the shadow that stood behind them. The 4th entity, the one that had woven their souls into one terrible whole and tied them to the earth, to this place, to me. They didn't come for revenge. They came so that I would become what I had always been considered, so that I would finish what had been started. On the last night, the electricity in the house went out. I sat in the living room in complete darkness, my back pressed against the wall, clutching a kitchen knife in my hands, an absurd weapon against what I was facing. The shadow didn't come from the forest. It emerged from the wall in the hallway. It was larger than I remembered, and consisted not just of darkness, but of something dense, alive, moving. It floated down the hallway, and I saw that the movement was them. The boys' faces, their limbs intertwined and twisted, made up the single body of this creature. Their eyes looked at me with emptiness, and their mouths were open in a soundless scream from which that same hateful whisper emanated. Complete us. Become a part. Set free. It filled the doorway. The smell of copper ore, damp earth, and decay became suffocating. I screamed, desperately, hopelessly, clamping my hands over my ears, but the voices sounded in my head. I saw the knife in my hand, and I understood. This was the only way out, the only way to stop it. The ritual required a sacrifice. It demanded blood. The creature reached towards me, a tangle of limbs, and I saw that at the end of one of them was my own face, contorted in horror. I squeezed my eyes shut and with a scream plunged the knife into my own throat. The pain was fiery, universal. I collapsed on the floor, choking on my own blood. The shadow loomed over me, and in the last seconds I saw it change. The boys' faces found peace. The horror in their eyes faded. They smiled at me, not a malicious smile, but a grateful one, and they dissolved along with the shadow. Silence. Real, deep, without a whisper. They found me the next morning, The investigation would say that Damien Eccles, despite being acquitted, could not bear the burden of guilt and committed suicide in his childhood home. The case would be closed for good, but I didn't die. I bled out. My heart stopped, but I didn't die. I lay on the morgue cart and felt the cold. I heard the doctors pronounce the time of death. I felt the hammer driving the lid onto the coffin, and then I heard a new whisper. At first quiet, like a single voice. Then a second one joined it. A third. And now there are 4 of us. We are waiting for the next one. The one who will hear our call. Who will come to the forest for a meeting. Who will be searching for answers. And the silence will be broken again. The second story. Confession of the Brick Walls. If the walls of Jonesboro Middle School could talk, they wouldn't tell you a story. They would whisper it right into your bones, freeze it in your memory, from where it could never be retrieved. They wouldn't talk about the boys with guns. They would talk about those who remained, about us. My name is Lena, and I'm in the 11th grade. But my real education didn't start in algebra class. It began 5 years ago, on that sunny, clear March day when the fire alarm rang. It was a false alarm, or so they said later. Students and teachers obediently, with a slight chuckle and relief at a cancelled test, streamed out into the schoolyard. I stood with my friend Sarah, squinting in the spring sun, arguing about whether we would go to a cafe after school. I never found out what we decided. The first shot didn't sound like a bang. It sounded like a click, a dry, heavy final click that switched our entire world from before to after. Then came the second, the third, a discordant cacophony cutting through the screams. I remember falling onto the cold, freshly thawed earth. I remember the smell of damp soil and gunpowder, sweetish, metallic, alien. I remember looking up at the second-floor window of the biology classroom. 2 figures stood there, small, almost toy-like from that distance. One was taking aim, the other was shouting something, but the wind carried the words away. Then the glass of the first-floor math classroom window shattered, and shards rained, down like tears. From that same window fell Natalie Parker, our English teacher. She didn't scream. She fell silently, and her bright yellow cardigan fluttered in the wind like the wings of a giant wounded butterfly. Then silence. Deafening. Oppressive, more terrifying than the shots. And then the wail of sirens. It grew, filling the universe, and it seemed it would never stop. 4 children, 1 teacher, 10 wounded. Everyone knows the shooters' names. Their faces flashed across every news report. Andrew Golden, Mitchell Johnson, Little Monster's child. Killers, spawn of violence and video games. People chose labels to their taste. But the victims' names, only we remembered those. Only those who knew them. Who sat at the same desk, copied homework, had crushes on them during recess. Stephanie Johnson, who always shared her lunch. Brittany Warner, who was afraid to speak in front of the class. James Williams, who dreamed of becoming a pilot. Kevin Jackson, whose laugh was the loudest. Mrs. Parker, who told me on the last lesson that my essay on To Kill a Mockingbird was the best she'd read in years of teaching. They were gone, but the school remained. It was renovated, of course. The glass was replaced, the bullet holes in the walls were patched, the classrooms were repainted. The next September started as usual, but the school was never the same again. It became a different entity, silent, traumatized, holding pain within itself. At first it was just sensations, a slight chill when passing that window, a seeming movement of the curtain in Mrs. Parker's empty classroom. The smell of her perfume, jasmine and vanilla, in a hallway where it could never be. Then came the sounds. The first time I heard it was in chemistry class. We were solving problems, and in the silence, under the steady ticking of the clock, I caught another rhythm. Quiet, persistent. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, pause. As if someone was tapping their knuckles on a desk, I looked around. No one. The teacher heard it too, frowned, but blamed it on the old pipes. The next day in history I heard a stifled chuckle, a child's with a hoarseness to it, like Kevin Jackson's when he tried to hold back laughter in class. I turned to look at his old desk. It was empty. I told Sarah about it. She paled and nodded. I hear it too, she whispered. Sometimes it's like footsteps running down the hallway when no one's there. Light, fast, like someone's late for class. We weren't the only ones. It wasn't spoken aloud, but it hung in the air like electricity before a storm. The school wouldn't let them go. It had absorbed their last moments, their fear, their confusion, and now it couldn't stay silent. One day I stayed late after school in the library. When I came out, the hallways were already empty. Only the emergency lights were on, casting long, distorted shadows, and I saw her. At the end of the hallway, by the exit to the yard where it all happened, stood a figure in a bright yellow cardigan. She wasn't a ghost in the classical sense. She was more like a memory, a pain manifested by the building itself. I couldn't see her face, only a silhouette outlined by the flickering light. She was looking out the window at the empty yard. I froze, unable to move. The air became thick and cold, and then I heard not a voice but right inside my head, a quiet, sad question. Why don't they see? I don't know how I got out of there. I only remember my heart pounding as if it wanted to burst out of my chest. After that, everything changed. I started seeing them more often, fleeting shadows in my peripheral vision, a reflection in the glass of a door, someone's frightened child's eyes looking back at me. I saw Stephanie. She was standing by her locker, as if she couldn't remember the combination. I saw James. He was looking out the window at the sky, at a passing airplane. They weren't evil. They were lost, stuck in the most terrible moment of their lives, and the school, like glue, was holding them here. But the scariest part wasn't that. The scariest part began when I realized they wanted to communicate. I was sitting in a toilet stall, trying to catch my breath after a panic attack. In class, on the door at eye level, someone had usually written or scratched inscriptions. I was looking at an old engraving. Mark plus Lisa, E. Love, and suddenly the letters began to blur. The wood darkened as if wet, and new words appeared on it, as if written by a wet finger. Help. I gasped and recoiled. Water started dripping from the ceiling, though it wasn't raining. The drops were thick, reddish. They fell on the floor, forming puddles that slowly arranged themselves into patterns, into numbers, 4 and 1 and 10. Then the wall hissed. I pressed myself against the cold stall, unable to scream. On the plaster, right in front of me, a silhouette began to appear. Unclear, trembling, it grew, stretched, and I realized it was the silhouette of a person aiming a rifle. I burst out of there screaming. I was taken to the principal, then to the school psychologist. I talked about ghosts, writings, voices. They nodded with pity in their eyes. Prescribed sedatives. Post-traumatic stress disorder, they said. You need a break from school, Lena. But I knew it wasn't PTSD. It was the school. It had chosen me. It chose me because I was there, because I saw, because I survived, and it wanted me to become its voice. One night, Sarah called me. She was crying, her voice breaking with hysteria. "Lena, they're here. They're everywhere. I see them in the windows when I walk by. They're looking at me. They're knocking on the glass. You have to come. You have to help them." I rushed to the school. The main door was locked, but the gate near the gym, which was always poorly secured, was open. I slipped inside. The darkness in the school at night isn't just an absence of light. It's a physical substance. It's thick, heavy. It presses on your shoulders, makes your heart beat faster. I walked down the hallway, lighting my path with my phone screen, and my footsteps echoed in the tomb-like silence. They were waiting for me. In the main hall, by the memorial plaque with the names of the dead, a light was burning. Candles, 5 candles arranged on the floor, and standing before them were they. 5 semi-transparent figures, 4 children and Mrs. Parker. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at the candles, and their faces were twisted in silent agony. The air filled with sounds. Not voices, but fragments, echoes of that day. Fire alarm. Laughter. Gunshot. Scream. Fire alarm. Gunshot. Silence. Fire alarm. It looped, growing, turning into a deafening, insane, symphonic hell. I fell to my knees, clamping my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside my head. And then Mrs. Parker turned to me. Her face was sad, but not angry. "They're not to blame," she whispered, and her voice was like the rustling of pages. "They're stuck too." She pointed a hand into the darkness behind me. I turned around. In the shadows, by the entrance to the cafeteria, stood 2 boys, Andrew and Mitchell. But they weren't the monsters from the posters. They were frightened, tearful children. They were clutching not rifles but their school backpacks. Their images flickered like a bad connection, and through them the figures with weapons sometimes briefly appeared. And I understood everything. The school wasn't just stuck at the moment of the victims' deaths. It was stuck at the moment of these boys' choice, at the moment of a monstrous mistake that forever tore apart hundreds of lives. It was a trap for everyone, for the killed, for the killers, for us, the survivors who came here every day and tried to forget. The ghosts of the boys looked at the ghosts of their victims with horror and remorse they couldn't express in life. And the victims looked at them with pain, but without hatred. They were links in the same chain, caught in an endless replay of the most terrible day of their lives. The school wasn't possessed by evil. It was possessed by pain, unlived, unspoken, unreleased pain. And it was screaming through us, the only ones who could still hear it. I don't know how long I sat there. The candles burned out. The images gradually faded, leaving behind only a chilling cold and an absolute all-consuming silence. The next day I didn't go to school. I couldn't. I'm writing this now, and I know I will never go back. But I also know it won't change anything, because Jonesboro School doesn't let anyone go. It continues to stand there, with its clean walls and new windows. Children go to lessons, the bell rings, life boils over. But at night, if you press your ear to the cold brick, you can hear a quiet tapping. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, pause. It's them. They are still there. They are waiting for someone to finally hear them, understand, forgive, and they will wait forever. Because some wounds don't heal, they just become part of the place where they were inflicted, part of the foundation, part of the walls, and the walls always remember. The third story. The sentence that breathes. My name is Marcus, and this is a true story that happened to me. I was young, driven, with big plans for life, but in an instant, Everything turned upside down. Every time an execution happens on death row at Potosi Prison, we feel it a week in advance. The air becomes different, thick, heavy, as if saturated with ozone before the most terrible storm. It absorbs the fear of the one being led to his final path and carries it through all the cells, forcing us, the condemned, to breathe the death terror of another. We are a living barometer of death, and lately the air hasn't been clearing. It's constantly thick, because everyone is waiting for the verdict. His verdict, the verdict in the case of Christopher Simmons. My name is Marcus, and I am 23 years old. For 6 years, I have been waiting my turn to die for stabbing a drug dealer to death when I was 17, the man who got my sister hooked on heroin. I'm not making excuses. I did it. But I am not a monster. I was a kid with a worldview twisted by pain and rage. Now I'm just a man, waiting for the state to decide if it has the right to kill him. And Chris Simmons. Everyone knows his case. It became a symbol. At 17, he broke into a stranger's house, bound her with duct tape, threw her into the trunk of her own car, drove to a bridge, and threw her into the river while she was still alive. Cold-bloodedly, without remorse. His lawyers talk about an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, a difficult childhood, about how a teenager is incapable of fully comprehending the finality of death. The prosecutors show photographs of Shirley Crocker, that very woman, a wife, a mother of 2, and speak of innate, irredeemable evil. And now, 9 old judges in Washington are deciding his fate, and mine along with it. Because if they abolish the death penalty for minors, my sentence will be commuted to life. I will breathe. If not, well, the line moves slowly, but inexorably. But in recent weeks, something started happening in the I block that makes you think the Supreme Court will be too late. That Simmons's sentence has already been passed. Just not by people. It started small. One night, we heard a screech. Not the usual prison screech. Old pipes, a creaking bunk, a guard's footsteps. This was a screech that made your blood run cold. Metallic, sharp, as if someone with inhuman strength was trying to move a huge, rusty metal door, like the door of an old car's trunk. The screech came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It echoed from the ventilation, from the water pipes. It seemed to emanate from the very walls, soaked through with despair. It lasted exactly as long as, according to investigators, Shirley Crocker had tried to escape her metal coffin. Exactly 47 minutes. And then came a silence more terrifying than any sound. The next night came the sounds of water. Not rain outside the window. There are none here. We have underground cells without windows. It was the sound of a powerful, raging flow, splashing, gurgling, the roar of water rushing somewhere. It grew, filling the entire space, and within it, you could make out desperate, choking sobs. A woman's and a child's, soul-chilling laughter. His laughter. Simmons's. Chris, whose cell is 2 down from mine, first screamed that we were all bastards and that it was a prank. He beat on the door, demanded they call the guard. But when the duty officer came, the sound stopped. The guard, an old hardened wolf nicknamed Bulldog, just smirked. Scared of ghosts, kid? Get ready for the real thing. But on the 3rd night, something worse than sounds arrived, the smell. I woke up because I was suffocating. A sweetish, cloying aroma of expensive perfume was wafting into my cell, mixed with the smell of damp earth, river silt, and something metallic. Blood. This smell drifted down the entire corridor, seeping through the bars. It was so tangible I could taste it on my tongue. It made me gag. From Simmons's cell came a wild animal-like shriek, not a cry of fear, but a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. "Take it away from me," he yelled. "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to." All of us, the whole yard, were silent, pressed against our door peepholes trying to see what was happening. But we only saw shadows dancing on the wall of his cell, and we heard his insane screams. In the morning, they took him out for exercise. He was gray, broken, his hands shaking. He stared into emptiness and whispered something soundlessly. When I walked past him, our eyes met. His held no malice, no bravado, not even fear. There was emptiness in them, a bottomless, cosmic emptiness, into which someone or something had made him look. "She comes to me," he suddenly exhaled, not addressing me specifically. "She shows me the water. She wants me to feel what she felt." After that, everything changed. Potosi Prison, already not a pleasant place, turned into the antechamber of hell. The manifestations became visual. One evening I saw a wet trail leading down the corridor floor, still damp after cleaning. Not from feet. It was wide, uneven, as if someone had dragged a wet sack across the floor. The trail led from the shower room straight to Simmons' cell and stopped right at his door. Another time, in the steam from the boiling water in my mug, a face formed for a moment, distorted by suffering, with a mouth sealed shut by tape. I flung the mug away and it shattered with a heart-rending crash, but the scariest things were happening to him. To Chris. He was wasting away before our eyes. He stopped eating, hardly slept. He sat for hours, staring at the wall, and whispered apologies. Apologies to Shirley, apologies to her children, apologies to his 17-year-old self, the boy who had done the unforgivable. The guards thought he was losing his mind to avoid execution, but I saw what they didn't. One night, through the peephole, I saw a woman enter his cell. She was dressed in a soaked dress that clung to her. Water streamed from her hair onto the floor, forming puddles. She wasn't scary. She was sad, infinitely tired and sad. She walked over to his bunk, where he lay curled up in a ball, and simply placed a hand on his shoulder. An icy hand. At her touch, he began to shake as if with a fever and whimper like a beaten puppy. She didn't hurt him. She just came, reminded, made him feel. Her visits were far worse than any physical torture. She was eating him away from the inside, burning out his soul drop by drop, and I understood. This was the real sentence, not the court's decision, not the injection in the vein. This was it. Retribution, come not from the world of men. It didn't just want his death. It wanted his complete, absolute understanding. It wanted him to live through every second of her agony in the few days or weeks he had left, for him to die dozens of times before the executioner ever pressed the plunger on the syringe. And the horror wasn't just for him. It was a horror for all of us. We watched as the line between the real and the otherworldly blurred, as the prison itself, this place of legalized death, became a conduit for something ancient and unjust. If a ghost can come to a murderer to torment him, what's to stop it from coming to any of us? To me? Yesterday, the Supreme Court issued its ruling. By a majority vote, the death penalty for minors was deemed unconstitutional. It's a historic decision, a precedent. All the news talks about a victory for humanism, for civilization, about America finally taking a step forward. This morning, they brought my papers. My sentence has been commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. I should be happy. I will live. In a cage, but live. But I can't be happy, because I know the truth. When the warden read the court's decision to Simmons, he didn't even lift his head. He sat on his bunk, arms wrapped around his knees, rocking quietly back and forth. The air in his cell was icy, even though the heating was on full blast. "You hear that, Simmons?" the guard said. "You're not getting executed. You get to live." Chris slowly raised his eyes to him. There was no relief in them, no joy, only insane, all-consuming terror. "No," he whispered. "No, you don't understand. Now it will never end. She will never leave. She will be with me forever. This is my life sentence." In the evening, when the lights in the prison went out, I heard his quiet, ragged crying. And another sound, a quiet, gentle, soul-freezing whisper coming right from the walls of his cell. A woman's whisper. It was telling a story. Something about cold water, about darkness, about children waiting for their mother at home. And tonight, the screech of the trunk and the noise of the water were louder than ever before. They sounded not only in our block. They came from the administrative wing, from the infirmary, even from the warden's office. It seems she wants everyone to know. Everyone to remember. And I lie on my bunk, stare at the ceiling, and understand that the most terrible sentence is not death. The most terrible sentence is life. A life with the ghost of your crime, who doesn't just haunt you, but lives inside you, breathes your breath, looks at the world through your eyes, and makes you relive every second of someone else's death, over and over again. The Supreme Court saved us from execution. But it couldn't save us from justice. It came on its own, and it turned out to be far more merciful and far more merciless than any human decision. It doesn't take away life. It takes away peace. Forever. And I know she will come for me too. Sooner or later. My victim will also want to tell her story. And Potosi Prison, this huge cold ear, is always ready to hear it and repeat it as a screech, a whisper, or a wet trail on the floor. The sentence has been passed, not by judges, by the world itself. And it reads, remember. The fourth story, Pixel Blood. My name is Travis. I'm from the city of Conway, Arkansas. Today I want to tell you a story about my friend, who fell into gaming addiction and completely lost his mind. His name is Scotty, and he's actually a really cool guy. But the situation he got into had been brewing for a very long time. He just didn't realize he could no longer control himself. The city of Conway was asleep. On its outskirts, in the large, once cozy family home of the Brisbanes, silence reigned, broken only by the steady hum of the system unit from behind Scotty's door. It was the sound of his breathing, the beating of his heart. While the city slept, Scotty was awake. He hadn't slept for 3 nights in a row. His eyes, red from strain, were glued to the monitor, where in the bloody chaos of the shooter, Counter-Strike, he was clearing a path to victory. Scotty Brisbane was 18 but looked 15. Thin, pale, with curly dark hair he forgot to cut. His world was limited to the 4 walls of his room and endless digital landscapes. Counter-Strike wasn't just a game. It was his life, his religion, his refuge. Here, he wasn't the insecure, complex guy his father constantly nagged about. College, which he never managed to start. Here, he was the god of war, the arbiter of destinies, King Rain. His fingers fluttered across the keyboard lightning fast. With a precise mouse movement, he sent another pixelated monster into oblivion. On the screen, a splash of virtual blood, the satisfying click of gaining experience points. Epic soundtrack chords thundered in his headphones, drowning out the real world. He didn't hear his sister Lisa tossing and turning behind the wall, trying to sleep. He didn't hear his mum, Martha, sighing in the kitchen, worrying about her son. He heard only the call of battle. "Scotty, it's 3 a.m. Go to bed," Lisa mumbled sleepily, banging her fist on the wall. He ignored it. His Discord squad was waiting for him. They were going after the main boss, the fallen Archangel Azrael. He couldn't let them down, but at the most crucial moment, when the boss had only 5% health left, Scotty's connection froze. The screen hung. Horror flashed across his face. He frantically drummed on the keyboard. "No, no, no." His whisper turned into a choked cry. The lag passed. He was back in the game, but it was too late. His character, the mighty warrior Rain, lay dead on the virtual floor. Azrael stood over him, and in the chat his teammates were howling with rage. "Noob, bye. Some decent internet, you bum. You lost it for everyone. Defeat. Shame. Failure." Scotty tore the headphones off his head and threw them against the wall. Anger, burning and uncontrollable, flooded him. He jumped up, knocking over his chair, and punched the desk with all his might. Pain shot through his knuckles, but he barely felt it. He felt only the humiliating emptiness of failure. The door to his room creaked open. His father, John Brisbent, stood in the doorway. A large, tired man with a face lined with wrinkles of worry. "Scotty, what's going on in here? Your games again?" His voice was hoarse with sleep and irritation. "Mom can't sleep. Lisa can't sleep enough. Look at yourself. You're degrading. You can't even take the trash out of your room, let alone do your homework." Usually, Scotty just stayed silent, gritting his teeth. But now, the poison of defeat and the insults from his teammates boiled in his blood. He turned to his father, and that familiar, dangerous spark flashed in his eyes. "Leave me alone," he hissed. "You don't understand anything. This is important." Important. His father took a step forward, his patience snapping. "Is it important to help your mother? Is it important to get an education? Is it important to be a human being, not a vegetable glued to a chair? That's important. And your shooters, that's kindergarten stuff, Scotty. A disgrace." With a sharp movement, his father grabbed the mouse from the desk and yanked the cord. Pulling it from the system unit, the monitor went black. "That's enough for today. Go to bed. Now." For Scotty, this was the final straw, the apex of humiliation. To be robbed of his world, his achievements, his only place where he meant something. Redness flooded his vision. He didn't remember what happened next. There was only a blind, animal impulse. He lunged for the shelf, holding his numerous esports. Prize, statuettes, trophies. His fingers closed around a heavy metal statuette for Player of the Season, a spiked statue of a warrior with a sword. And before he even realized what he was doing, his hand, by inertia, honed by thousands of hours in the game, described a short, sharp arc. A dull, wet sound echoed, one that shouldn't exist in reality. Not a pixelated thud, but something real, terrifying. His father froze, his eyes wide with incomprehension, and then a crimson line appeared on his temple. He slowly, like a felled giant, sank to his knees, then collapsed face down on the floor. Silence. Only the hum of the system unit. Scotty stood, unable to move, clutching the bloodied statuette in his hand. The anger vanished instantly, replaced by soul-freezing horror. From behind the door came his mother's frightened voice. "John? Scotty? What was that? What fell?" He didn't answer. He stared at his father, at the blood spreading across the light-colored carpet. His brain refused to accept the reality of what was happening. It was like a cutscene from a game. Brutal, but not real. The door flew open. His mother and Lisa stood frozen on the threshold. Their simultaneous scream of horror pierced the silence and finally brought Scotty back to reality. This was real. He had done this. The following hours blurred into a nightmarish puzzle. His mother's screams, the wail of sirens, the rough hands of police officers clamping handcuffs on his wrists. He was led away, unresisting, to a patrol car. He was still somewhere out there, in Counter-Strike, trying to figure out on which level this glitch had happened. He was convicted. A minor, first offense, crime of passion, no death penalty, but prison for many years became his new level. His mother and sister, broken by grief and betrayal, sold the house and left Conway, trying to erase the most terrible night of their lives from memory. The house on the outskirts fell silent. It stood empty, with boarded-up windows overgrown, with weeds. Local teenagers told scary stories about it, afraid to go near. They said strange sounds came from it at night, like someone frantically typing on a keyboard. And a year later, a new tenant moved into the house. Not a human. Something born from pain, anger, despair, and millions of hours of pixelated violence. It didn't come from our world. It downloaded itself from it. Scotty, serving his sentence in a juvenile correctional facility, had no idea his legacy was living its own life. One evening, he was called to the guard. The man was pale. "Brisbent, I have bad news for you. Your mother, your sister." He hesitated. They were found this morning in their new apartment. They're dead. It looked strange. As if... He swallowed. As if they'd been attacked with an axe. But no weapon was found at the scene. Only this. The guard placed a small, clear evidence bag on the table. Inside was a small, perfectly polished metal figurine, a statuette of a warrior with a sword, an exact copy of the one that had been the murder weapon used on his father. An icy hand gripped Scotty's heart. He understood. It wasn't a person, it was a glitch, the worst glitch in the world. That same night, in the empty Brisbane house on the outskirts of Conway, a light came on, a flickering bluish monitor light. The computer, frozen on the most difficult level of Counter-Strike, started up on its own. Keys on the keyboard began pressing themselves as if under invisible fingers. The cursor on the screen jerked around, aiming at virtual monsters, and then a sound came from the dust-covered speakers. Quiet at first, like a whisper, then growing louder. It was a voice. Composed of game script samples, the hiss of the fan, and the distorted voice of Scotty himself recorded once in a chat. The game continues. The walls of the house shuddered. Cracks crept across the old wallpaper, forming familiar pixelated textures from Counter-Strike. The air filled with the smell of ozone and something metallic, like hot iron and blood mixed together. The next day, a local vagrant seeking shelter from the rain wandered into the house. He never came out. He was found the next day in the living room. His body was untouched, no wounds, no signs of violence. But the expression on his face was a frozen mask of pure, inhuman terror. And on his chest lay that same statuette. The police wrote it off as an accident. His heart must have given out, they said. But rumors began to spread through the town. Rumors that the Brisbane house was haunted, that the spirit of the son lived there, seeking revenge for his imprisonment. But it wasn't Scotty's spirit. It was something else. A digital ghost. a collective image of all the anger, all the aggression, all the pain that Scotty had poured into the game. His pixelated rage, unleashed into the world on that fateful night, had found physical form. It had materialized through the one object that had been a witness and accomplice to the murder, the computer. It had become the Pixel Demon. It didn't kill itself. It made people see their worst nightmares, their deepest fears, projecting them directly onto their retinas like a monitor screen. It launched the most horrific cutscenes in their minds, filmed by their own imaginations. Their own brains killed them, unable to withstand the horror. Scotty, sitting in his cell, felt it. Every death, every new victim of his digital double. He felt his creation gaining strength, feeding on the fear of the entire city. It had become his account, his character, gone rogue. One night, a guard came to his cell, but something was wrong. His movements were sharp, angular, like a poorly animated NPC. His eyes looked empty, and from his half-open mouth came a barely audible, obsessive sound, the repeating sound of a virtual weapon reloading. "Your turn," the guard rasped in a voice devoid of anything human. The final boss, level, prison. Scotty understood. The Pixel Demon had come for him, to finish the campaign, to erase the last reminder of its creator. The walls of the cell swam, turning into the familiar textures of a prison level from Counter-Strike. The floor beneath his feet became virtual. Ghostly outlines of his favorite in-game weapon appeared in Scotty's hands by themselves. And before him stood it, his double. A creature of flickering light and shadows, with monitor eyes where pixels of blood danced. It was the embodiment of all his anger, all his hatred, all his pain. "Let the final round begin," sounded in his head in the voice of the game's announcer. Scotty knew he couldn't run. He couldn't hide. The only way to stop this was to finish this level, to accept the rules of the game he himself had created. He raised the phantom weapon. His heart was pounding wildly. This wasn't just a fight for his life. It was a fight for his soul, against that very dark part of himself that he had fed for so long, sitting in front of the monitor. The Pixel Demon rushed to attack, and Scotty, for the first time in his life, did not press the reload button. He accepted the fight. The fifth story. The Man with the Shotgun. Fordyce, Arkansas, was a place where time flowed slower than honey. Everyone knew everyone here. The embarrassment of failing a math test was the greatest tragedy, and the week's loudest event was when old Hank from the gas station tried to catch a runaway raccoon with his bare hands. Until that Tuesday began as usual. Heat shimmered over the asphalt, distorting the outlines of the buildings on Main Street. The air hung heavy with the smell of fried chicken from Mama Dottie's diner and the lazy buzzing of flies. I was sitting on a bench outside the barbershop, sipping iced tea and discussing the latest news with Sheriff Mitch, or rather, the complete lack of it. Mitch, a man with a face weathered like old oak and kind eyes, was more worried about whether someone had stolen an apple from Mrs. Elsie's stall than about any real crime. "Quiet day," he grumbled, adjusting his holster. "Too quiet. My lower back is aching. Means bad weather's coming. Or trouble." He laughed at his own old joke, but a shadow flickered in his eyes. Sheriffs in towns like this sense the tension in the air before barometers do. The first warning sign was a sound, not a scream, not a crash. A sharp, dry, rolling crack that split Fordyce's noon slumber in two. The birds in the trees fell silent at once. Mitch froze, his hand instinctively moving to his pistol grip. "A gunshot," he muttered, more to himself than to me. Over at the Olson's farm, probably, their old truck backfiring, the mufflers acting up again. But a second later the crack came again. And another. Not isolated anymore. It was a chaotic, furious cannonade. It was coming from the direction of the Lil Jon supermarket, the biggest store in town. Mitch's face became serious, professional. He sprang into action, yelling at me, "Get down, Jess," and sprinted to his patrol car. The siren wailed, shredding the town's silence to pieces. I didn't get down. Mesmerized, I ran after him, hiding behind cars. What I saw in the Lil Jon parking lot was seared into my memory forever, like a brand. Standing in the middle of the asphalt, under the scorching sun, was him. A man, perfectly ordinary looking, in a plaid shirt, worn-out jeans. His face was pale, almost grey, and his eyes were empty, completely empty, like a fish washed up on shore. In his hands was an old, battered shotgun. He moved slowly, methodically, like a robot on an assembly line. Raised the gun. Aimed not at anyone in particular, but just into the space before him. A deafening roar followed, and the store's window exploded in a shower of glass. Muffled, distant screams came from inside. Then he turned and saw the first patrol car. A young officer, Bobby, with whom I'd had a soda just yesterday, jumped out. His face was twisted in horror and confusion. He was shouting something, hands raised, probably "Drop the weapon." The man with the shotgun answered him with a blast. The buckshot hit Bobby in the chest, throwing him back against the car. He slid to the ground, a crimson stain spreading across his uniform. That was the most monstrous part. Not the shot itself, but its normality. There was no malice in his movements, no rage, not even any awareness of what was happening. He was just doing his job. As if mowing the lawn or chopping wood, lift, aim, fire, reload, mechanically, soullessly. A second car arrived. Mitch jumped out. His face was like steel. He didn't shout. He saw Bobby's body. He saw bleeding people trying to crawl out of the store. He raised his service pistol. "Drop the weapon." On the ground. "Now." His voice boomed, full of authority and pain. The man with the shotgun slowly turned his head towards him. Their eyes met, and in that moment I thought I saw a shadow of something flicker across the man's face. Not quite awareness, but rather a bottomless, cosmic sorrow. As if he was looking at Mitch from behind a thick, invisible pane of glass. He didn't drop the gun. He began to raise it. Shots rang out. The sharp, dry cracks of Mitch's pistol. 1, 2, 3. The bullets hit the man in the shoulder, in the side. He jerked like a puppet but didn't fall. He didn't seem to feel any pain at all. He tried to raise the shotgun again. Mitch fired once, more. This time, accurately. The bullet hit the arm holding the stock. The shotgun clattered to the asphalt. Only then did the man stagger and collapse to his knees. Other officers who had run up subdued him. He didn't resist. He just knelt there, staring at a single point in front of him, quietly, almost melodically humming some children's song. It was more terrifying than any scream. Hell began. The wail of sirens grew, merging into one continuous, piercing moan. The parking lot turned into a battlefield. Blood, glass, the screams of the wounded, the crying of those lucky enough to survive. 4 people didn't make it. 9 were wounded. Among them, 2 cops, including Bobby, who miraculously pulled through. The man was subdued, gagged, his wounds doused with antiseptic and taken away in handcuffs. His identity was quickly established. Travis Boyd, a quiet, reclusive accountant, living on the outskirts of town with his sick mother. Never had any conflicts with anyone, The weapon was registered with all the paperwork. No psychiatric diagnoses, no visible motives. Just one sunny day, he woke up, took his gun, drove to the store, and started killing. But the worst part began later, when the hell in the parking lot ended, and the hell in the minds of those who saw it began. The next morning, I went to see Mitch. He was sitting in his office, an untouched cup of coffee in front of him. He looked 20 years older. "He didn't feel any pain, Jess," the sheriff said, not looking at me. "The bullets hit him. He was bleeding out, but he looked at me, empty, like he wasn't there, like he was just a shell." Then news came from the doctor at the hospital. Travis Boyd, despite his severe wounds, showed no signs of suffering. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and continued to quietly hum that same song. And when they came to question him, he just repeated the same phrase in a voice without intonation, like a recording. "They said the garden needs cleaning. The weeds are choking the flowers." The investigators decided it was the rambling of a wounded man, but Mitch persisted. He went to Boyd's house. The house was tidy, unremarkable. Travis's mother, who suffered from dementia, had already been moved to a nursing home. Travis's room was in perfect order, and on the bedside table lay an old, worn-out notebook. Mitch brought it to me. We sat in his office and leafed through it. It was a diary, but not a normal one. There were no emotions, just dry, factual entries written in neat handwriting. May 13th, bought milk. Mother slept poorly. There were stars in the evening. May 14th, fixed the fence. Dreams were colorful. May 15th, heard voices in the garden. They spoke about weeds. And so on. The entry about voices in the garden was repeated several times. The last entry was made on the day of the shooting. Today, the garden needs cleaning. The tools are ready. They are waiting. Mitch and I exchanged glances. A chill ran down my spine. That same night, Mitch got a call from the officer on duty. His voice was trembling. "Sheriff, you better come. Boyd, in his cell. You'd better see for yourself." We rushed over. Travis Boyd was sitting on the bunk in his solitary cell. He wasn't singing. He was staring straight ahead at the solid wall. And on that wall, on the grey concrete, patterns were emerging, as if someone had drawn on it with wet fingers. They formed primitive but recognizable images, trees, flowers, and figures of people falling to the ground with dots for faces. A guard, pale as a sheet, whispered, "He's doing it." Without touching the wall, he just sits and stares, and they appear. Mitch ordered surveillance increased and told everyone to keep it quiet. But it was impossible to contain. The town was scared to death. People whispered that Travis Boyd was possessed by the devil, that the voices in his garden were voices from hell. And then it started happening to us, to those who were on that parking lot. The young officer, Bobby, who had miraculously survived the buckshot, was the first to complain. He started thinking his house smelled of freshly turned earth and gunpowder at night. He said he dreamed of a huge, dark garden where guns grew instead of flowers, and shiny shell casings hung from the trees. Then the cashier from Lil Jon, who had seen the faces of the dead, started losing his mind. He kept hearing quiet, childlike, humming everywhere. And one morning I woke up with a strange feeling. My small apartment smelled of lilacs and fresh earth. I lived on the 3rd floor. I had no garden, no houseplants. The smell was intrusive, thick. I went to the kitchen to get some water and froze. On the clean surface of the countertop lay a few blades of grass and a lump of damp, dark soil, as if someone had just walked through the kitchen in dirty boots. Cold terror gripped me. I understood it wasn't over. That the shooting in the parking lot was only the beginning. The sewing, the peak of the nightmare, was Mitch's disappearance. He didn't show up for work, didn't answer calls. When we broke into his house, we found him in the living room. He was sitting in an armchair, staring into emptiness. His service pistol lay on the coffee table in front of him, and on the wall above the fireplace, on the white wallpaper, a single word was smeared in mud, drawn with a finger or something else. Garden. Mitch was taken to the same clinic as Boyd. He was conscious but didn't recognize anyone, and just, like Boyd, quietly hummed that same song. I am the last one left in my right mind among the direct witnesses, and I can feel it getting closer to me too. At night, I have dreams. I see that very garden. It's huge, endless, under a strange purple sky. And in it, among strange, twisted trees, people are walking. Travis Boyd with his shotgun, Mitch with his pistol, Bobby, and others. They walk silently, methodically, like robots, between the rows, and weed them. And instead of weeds, hands, legs, heads stick out of the ground. Of those who were on the parking lot. Those who became weeds, and I know that soon it will be my turn to join the gardeners. Because I became a witness, and a witness is also a kind of seed. And for the garden to grow, it must either be weeded out, or planted in one of its endless rows. The last thing I heard from the investigator on the Boyd case was that they found traces of an unknown fungal microorganism in his blood, the kind usually found in very old, deep woods. One that can affect the nervous system, creating complex hallucinations and suppressing the sense of pain, as if some intelligent mold from under the earth decided to tend to its garden, and found hands to do it with. But that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I'm sitting in my house and hearing, through the closed windows, the faint smell of freshly turned earth. And it seems like someone is quietly humming outside my door. They've come for me, to take new tools, or to weed out another weed. The game is only beginning. And the final scene will be played out not in a supermarket parking lot, but in that very dark garden that grows right under our feet. You should be careful when you walk on the earth. You never know what the gardeners will decide next, or if it's time for them to weed out your town too. The sixth story. Whisper in the asphalt. It was the year 2021. Camden, Arkansas. The last day before freedom, before our long-awaited vacation. The air was thick and sweet, like an overripe peach, and the sun scorched so intensely that the asphalt on the highway melted, leaving ghostly trails behind passing cars. We were gripping it with the tires of our old SUV, all five of us. Me, Michael behind the wheel, his endlessly chatty girlfriend Lisa, and the twin brothers Evan and Adam in the back seat, glued to their phones. We were heading to Greer's Ferry, lake for the weekend, to fish, grill steaks, and forget about deadlines and office life. The road was deserted. Hardly any cars, just the occasional massive semi, whose drivers seemed to have long become one with their iron beasts. The scent of pine and hot concrete mingled in the cabin with the aroma of coffee from a thermos. We laughed, argued over who would catch the most fish, and made naive grand plans. The decision to stop at the Lucky Star gas station near Exit 73 felt like an essential part of the trip. We needed to refill our nearly empty tank, grab some ice for the cooler, chips, and double-check that we hadn't forgotten charcoal for the grill. Lucky Star was your typical roadside station. Sun-faded stickers on the windows, a couple of dented fuel pumps, and a small brick building with a convenience store. The car rolled smoothly under the canopy. I was the first to step out, stretching and squinting against the sun. The first growl shattered the idyllic moment. It didn't come from the road, it came from beneath it, it seemed. Low, animalistic, shaking the very air. Then a second, a third. The roar built into a hellish symphony. From around the bend, kicking up clouds of dust, a group of motorcyclists emerged. There were 8 of them. 8 shadows in black leather, spattered with road grime from head to toe. They didn't ride. They advanced, their Harleys growling like hungry beasts. They stopped in a semicircle in the parking lot, blocking the exit, killed their engines, and a ringing silence fell. Far more terrifying than the noise. They were not just menacing. There was something wrong about them. Alien. Their leather jackets were old, cracked, like they'd been taken off the dead. They didn't just smell of tobacco and gasoline. It was a strange, nauseating mix of smoke, sweat, old oil, and something else. Sweet and rotten, like the stench of decay barely masked by cheap chemicals. They didn't look at us. Not at first. They dismounted with an unnatural, synchronized grace and moved toward the store. Their movements were heavy, mechanical, as if their limbs weren't made of flesh, but of something sinewy and metallic. We froze by the car, instinctively huddling together. "Guys, let's just fuel up and leave," Lisa whispered. Her cheerful mood had vanished without a trace. We followed them inside. The air in the store grew stale and heavy from their presence. They silently spread out, grabbing beer cans and chips from the shelves like they'd done it 100 times. Behind the counter stood an elderly cashier, Jerry, according to the stitched name tag on his chest. He smiled nervously, his eyes darting from one biker to the next. We got in line. In front of us stood a gray-haired man in a cowboy hat, buying a bottle of water and a sandwich. The cashier was already ringing him up when one of the bikers, the largest one, with a tangled beard and dead, icy blue eyes, stepped toward the counter. His jacket had a crooked name patch. Ted. "Hey, buddy, there's a line here," the cowboy said quietly but firmly. Ted didn't respond, didn't even look at him. He just moved forward like a tank and shoved the man aside. The cowboy wasn't expecting that kind of brute strength. He stumbled into a magazine rack and collapsed to the floor with a dull groan. It all happened in a second. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Michael shouted, stepping forward. That was a mistake. The silence detonated. The other 7 bikers, as if responding to some unseen signal, turned toward us. Their faces showed no anger, no amusement. They were empty. Completely empty. Ted slowly turned to Michael. He didn't say a word, just pulled a huge time-blackened revolver from his waistband. It didn't look like a modern weapon. It was an old antique thing, like something out of a western. A deafening bang rang out. He didn't shoot at us. He fired into the ceiling. A blinding flash, an ear-shattering boom, and a rain of plaster and dust rained down on us. Lisa screamed, clinging to me. The twins were frozen in shock. The bitter stench of gunpowder mixed with a nauseating stench. Ted slowly, theatrically lowered the revolver. His icy blue eyes finally locked onto Michael. He smiled, a smile so wide it looked like his face cracked open, revealing not teeth, but something dark and inhuman. "Drive on," he rasped. His voice grated like rusted gears. "Safe travels." We don't remember how we got out of there. We dropped our shopping basket, ran outside, shoved Lisa into the car. Michael, shaking, started the engine. The bikers didn't follow. They stayed inside. We sped away from that cursed place, pedal to the floor. At first, we were silent. Then came nervous laughter, attempts to convince ourselves it was just a run-in with some lowlifes, that we were lucky it ended the way it did. But the fear lingered, thick as fog. We made it to the lake, set up camp, but the fun never came. The evening around the fire was tense. We jumped at every noise in the woods. The smell of the campfire made me nauseous. It reminded me of that other smell. That night I woke from a nightmare. I dreamed I was lying in the tent, and someone was walking outside. Heavy, measured steps, and a quiet, monotonous shuffling. And the smell, sweet and rotten, of gasoline and decay. In the morning we found clear footprints around our tent, large, deep boot prints. They circled the tent and vanished into the edge of the woods. Probably a ranger or something, Evan said uncertainly. But rangers don't smell like death. We broke camp early. We all just wanted to go home. The drive back was torture. Every motorcycle we saw in the distance made our hearts race. We stayed quiet. At home I tried to forget, but I couldn't. First came the smells. I started to sense it everywhere, in the subway, in crowds, at home, before bed. That same sweet, rotten trail of gasoline and flesh. It came and went in an instant. Then came the sounds, a distant low rumble of a motorcycle outside my window in the middle of the night. But when I jumped up and looked, there was nothing there. I reached out to the others. Turned out, it wasn't just me. Lisa saw those icy blue eyes in her dreams. Michael heard a creaky voice whispering to him when he was home alone. Adam, one of the twins, the more sensitive one, said he constantly felt like someone was watching him. They mark their prey, he said once. It gave us chills. Then Evan disappeared. He didn't show up for work, didn't answer calls. When we broke into his apartment, we were hit by that same familiar, nauseating smell. The place was empty. His jacket lay on the living room floor. And on the wall, smeared in soot or something sticky, was one word. Follow. We went to the police. Of course they didn't believe us. Chalked it up to paranoia, stress trauma. They shrugged. But that night, I had a dream. I was back at the Lucky Star gas station, but it was abandoned, covered in dust and cobwebs, and in the center, forming a perfect circle, stood them, all 8, still as statues, and in the center on his knees was Evan. He looked at me with empty, glassy eyes. And Ted, placing his heavy, leather-clad hand on his shoulder, rasped, "The hunt is just beginning. The highway's longer than you think." I woke up drenched in cold sweat. My heart was pounding like a caged bird, and in the room, thick and suffocating, was that smell. It was here. They were here. They had come for me. I realized we hadn't just run into a gang of brutal bikers. We had crossed paths with something ancient, something that lives on the edges of endless roads, feeds on fear, and stalks its prey until it goes mad or disappears forever. They are the road ghosts, the asphalt hunters, and they chose us. Now, I sit in my room, writing this. Outside I hear the distant rising roar of motorcycles, not one, not two, many. They're coming for me, and I know the only way to survive is to drive. Keep driving, never stop, never leave the highway, never pull over at gas stations. Flee along the endless strip of asphalt, praying my car has enough gas and I have enough strength to outrun them. But I also know something else. Sooner or later, the gas runs out. Strength fades, and sooner or later, you see a lone headlight in your rearview mirror, getting closer and closer, and you hear their creaky whisper, "We found you."